Released in 1994 for the Super NES, Final Fantasy VI has consistently generated hype and acclaim from fans of console RPGs. The second installment of the series on the system, it is regularly invoked as one of the greatest games in the genre, and it is still played often today. Brought to North America as Final Fantasy III, it has gained critical praise and continues to be considered a bright spot for the series. For the first time in the history of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi took an auxiliary role in the game's development, as Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito took over as co-directors. However, Sakaguchi did contribute significantly to the story in his role as producer, and created the characters of Terra and Locke. Yoshitaka Amano designed the characters as he had done since the very beginning of the series. Per usual, Final Fantasy mainstay Nobuo Uematsu created the game's soundtrack. The story revolves around Terra, who is named Tina in the Japanese version. Terra is a brainwashed Magitech knight controlled by Kefka, the chief adversary in the game. Kefka is part of the Gestalian Empire, a supreme body that seeks to capture Espers, magical creatures, to extract their essences and revive magic, a mystical force that has been mostly dormant since an ancient conflict called the War of the Magi. Through magic, Gestal and Kefka seek to control the world and expand their power. Under the Empire's control in the beginning, Terra is sent to Narsh, a mining city, to capture an Esper. As Terra approaches the Esper, she falls under a mental spell. She is eventually saved by a sympathizer of the Returners, a group of rebels committed to thwarting the Empire's plans. The story does much to explore Terra's past, her identity, and her role in the future of the world. However, it's important to note that the game was specifically designed such that most of the protagonists are all important characters, each with their own significant personal stories that contribute to the plot. There are some exceptions to this, however. Some characters, such as Gogo and Yumero, are not explored very well. Overall, though, this is a unique facet of the game that has been rarely utilized in the Final Fantasy series to the same extent. When it comes to graphics, the game is certainly a big step up from the previous installments in the series. In comparison to the blockier sprites and battle graphics in Final Fantasy IV and V, Final Fantasy VI looks a lot more crisp and vibrant. It was also the only game in the series to feature the same sprites for both exploration and in battle. This adds a more consistent look to Final Fantasy VI compared to its predecessors. Also, the game expanded upon the basic sprite gestures and emotional reactions used in Final Fantasy V, and characters now react to various scenes and dialogue through intense sprite animations. As far as soundtracks go, the game provides a huge score, Uematsu's biggest ever, that captures every mood of the story effectively. From the opening theme onward, the game's songs will stick in your head for good. Uematsu's trademark use of melody is especially prevalent and can be heard in songs like Terra's theme, Epitaph, and Locke's theme. Dancing Mad, the song played during the last battle, is also considered a series highlight. In my estimation, it is one of the best video game soundtracks ever, let alone RPG scores. Uematsu personally admitted that he was very pleased by the way the soundtrack turned out. Referring to Final Fantasy VI, he said, "With the satisfaction and excitement I felt after finishing that project, I thought I had reached my primary goal and could quit doing game music with no regrets." The Esper system was also unique and interesting and allowed for a certain degree of customization that wasn't possible in former games in the series. For instance, you could make one character into a healer and another into the team's offensive magic user. Magic remains with the character after each spell is mastered. This creates a customization double-edged sword though, as almost every character can learn all the magic. Characters also gain special skill-up bonuses when they level, depending on the Esper that's equipped. Espers can also be utilized during battles and act similarly to summon magic in the previous Final Fantasy games. Summoning an Esper usually damages all enemies or protects the party in some way. Outside of the Esper and magic system, each character is locked into a special skill. For example, Terra can use Morph, which vastly increases her magic power for a duration. Edgar can use powerful tools to do damage to enemies. Locke can steal items from enemies. Sabin can utilize Blitz, a series of martial arts attacks that inflict damage. In this way, the game locks the characters into somewhat defined roles while still allowing for the customization of the Espers. This creates a pretty good balance in Final Fantasy VI in my opinion. Probably the most mind-blowing aspect of the game is the story. Some of the traditional elements of a classic RPG are here, such as an evil empire and a group of rebels, but the game handles these archetypes well through its changing tides and plot twists. Most of the characters are pretty complex and likable, each with their own contribution to the tale. I found the stories of Shadow, Locke, and Celeste to be especially interesting. The story of the Espers and their history is also one of the most infatuating elements of the storyline, adding color to the narrative and breaking some RPG stereotypes. At first, the player is generally led to believe that the game is more about the Gestalian Empire and its thirst for power. But as the game unfolds, it ends up being more about the Espers and their role in creating world balance than anything else. In almost every way, the game's story is darker and more interesting than its predecessors. Unlike the relatively cheery Final Fantasy V, for instance, Final Fantasy VI includes several deaths throughout the story. The game also references mass poisoning, suicide, etc. This change was relatively new for the series, but it works out incredibly well in Final Fantasy VI. The game's main villain, Kefka, is certainly a unique antagonist by RPG standards. Hardly physically imposing, Kefka can be characterized more as a zealous lunatic with an intense lust for power. Toward the beginning of the game, he seems to be more of a dimwit than an actual adversary. Of course, that changes completely once his plans for world domination unfold. To all that have played the game, Kefka's laugh is an unmistakable fixture. By far, his presence is one of the most recognizable aspects of the game. If I had just one qualm with this game, it is that the difficulty level makes it a bit too easy. Most of the bosses can be beaten using the same powerful magic spells and attacks that your team has, using healing sporadically. Some bosses have immunities, but these can generally be overcome, figured out, and circumvented. There are some very difficult encounters though, such as the boss of the Fanatic's Tower, which is very nice. Unfortunately, there are also a few ridiculous bugs that allow players to defeat almost every enemy in the game, including bosses, with a simple Vanish Doom or Vanish X-Zone magic combination. This was a definite oversight on the part of the game's developers, but thankfully it doesn't affect the average gamer too much. Final Fantasy VI offers a huge variety of side content, especially in the later parts of the game. The best magic spell, weapons, and side stories are not mandatory and must be discovered by the player's own volition. Unlike many other games in the genre, you don't even have to obtain all the characters after the cataclysm that alters the world in the middle of the game. The World of Ruin leaves much of the sequence of events up to the player, including the time where Kefka is confronted. In fact, it is possible to challenge Kefka only after having found a few of the characters in the World of Ruin. This was a refreshing new change for the series that helped those who felt that RPGs were way too linear and structured. The game's translation is also not fantastic, but that isn't all on Squaresoft. Ted Woolsey's English translation had to adhere to Nintendo's strict code of standards regarding content. And when it came to Nintendo's standards, strict is an understatement. For instance, in towns the lettering bar was changed to cafe, and the spell holy was even renamed to pearl. Several religious references were removed, and some of Kefka's spoken threats are mild compared to the original game. Some of the enemy and Esper sprites were also altered to add more clothing in the US version. Bar none, Final Fantasy VI is one of the best games in the series, and one of the most complete RPGs ever created. I personally think this game shines above any other SNES title, and is quite possibly my favorite game ever created. Each characteristic of the game complements the others, from the story, to the characters, the music, and the battles. It really keeps the player's attention throughout. It is by no mistake that the game is routinely played and praised decades after its inception, and often streamed online. And that will do it for the Final Fantasy VI retrospective and review. Please tell me in the comments below which aspect of the game you liked the most. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and keep posted for my other videos.